Hello, and welcome back to the panel. We'd like to begin our first program for the year by thanking all of our viewers and followers for the kind words and support we have received since we started this program last year. The response has truly been encouraging, and we appreciate all the feedback and suggestions we've received. A special thanks to my two regular panelists, Mrs. Roy Bodden and Mr. Mario Ebanks, for bringing their vast knowledge, insights, and clarity to the issues that we've been discussing. And tonight, we continue in that vein with our first edition for 2022. It's on a topic that has often been raised on the panel and which seems to somehow insert itself into other discussions. But that's how important the issue of jobs market and employment for Caymanians is, especially under the umbrella of work, workforce opportunities, and residency Cayman. And there is no better person to bring a balanced and impartial perspective to this matter than our guest tonight. We welcome Mr. Wesley Howell to the panel. Mr. Howell is the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Border Control and Labor, as well as being the Supervisor of Elections. Among other things, he oversees work. When it was established in 2018, work was visualized as aiming to deliver durable employment and opportunities for the advancement of Caymanians through development, training, internship, apprenticeships, and partnerships with private sector businesses. Additionally, the department is responsible for processing work permits, permanent residency, and Caymanian status applications. It's a huge task, especially now that COVID-19 has caused so much disruption and displacement in the labor market. Even before COVID struck, there had been much talk and effort around streamlining work to make it work better to live up to its objectives, especially in how vacancies are advertised and positions filled. Clearly, work is vital. So how has it been working and what is being done to make work better? Tonight, that's what we'll be discussing on the panel with Mr. Wesley Howell. Good night, gentlemen, and welcome to the panel.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
Mario, welcome.
His mic is muted.
Okay. Mario, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying it's great to have Mr. Howell with us because he's a fine young man, and we look forward to his contribution and his discussion with us tonight.
Okay, very good. Mr. Howell, can you give us an overview of your responsibilities as it relates to employment and immigration?
So I'll start by generally sharing what the Ministry of Border Control and Labor is made up of. We've had a tweak post-election in April of 2021. So the ministry is responsible for border control and labor, but those departments are made up of a combination of work, it's about 130 employees, customs and border control, 229 employees, Department of Labor and Pensions, 26 employees, and core ministry, 7 employees. And as a new development, we also have responsibility for Travel Cayman, and that's about 110, 115 employees, but that does fluctuate a bit more often. Yeah. So that's our makeup. Our minister is the Deputy Premier, MP Christopher Saunders, who also has responsibility for the Ministry of Finance in his role as the Minister for Finance as well as the Minister for Border Control. So that's our makeup, and we have been working quite diligently on a number of factors, but none the least is sort of keeping abreast of delivering service in the midst of the changes that are happening within travel, imports, and the labor market, particularly around, most recently, around workers who were displaced due to the closure of our tourism industry, which is now sort of restarting as the reopening continues. So that in a nutshell is who I am, what I do. I think you shared in the opening that I'm also supervisor of elections. That's a part-time job from my main government job. And when a referendum, by-election or general election is called, I then go on leave from my ministry position, so I cease to have any contact with our direction from a minister. I report to His Excellency and the Deputy Governor from the Elections Office, and essentially go off for whatever period of time that is. Usually it's 5 to 6 months in the run up to preparing for and delivering on the general election or referendum. So yeah, that all keeps me quite busy.
You really have your hands full, Miss Howell, and a man of many hats. Do you sleep at night?
One of the things that I can share, I went to view a demonstration of 911 a couple of years back, and one of the operators had a telephone call from a caller seeking medical assistance for someone who had chest pains, and they worked very professionally, walked through all the things that they should do to help protect the patient until the ambulance arrived, and they handed off, and the medical folks took over and did their things, and the very professional person turned around and said, "All right, what are we having for lunch?" And I thought, geez, you just did all that and now you're ready to eat lunch. But then it dawned on me, if they couldn't separate themselves from the pressures of the work, then they couldn't do the job that they were doing. So in my role, yes, there's a whole lot of moving parts, and because some of these agencies operate extended hours, there's usually fires that are being fought late at night, but it's part of the job, and praise God that He's built me in such a way that this is something that I enjoy doing.
And we think you're doing a wonderful job. Well, tonight, many of our viewers and listeners are waiting to hear you speak about employment. As you know, we've been talking about employment for some time and talked to many stakeholders. And tonight, we wanted to hear it straight from your lips and regarding what's happening with work. So you could tell us how work is working and what's being done to improve or upgrade.
So work was the brainchild of the previous government. The initiative that gave birth to work really had a separation of the border control aspects and the immigration aspects from what is now work, and that went off and merged with customs to form customs and border control. That's headed up by Mr. Clifford and his able team across there. They've been doing an excellent job with that merger. On the other side, the administrative sides of what was then immigration, so that was work permit, permanent residency, Kimanian status, merged with what was then the National Workforce and Development Agency, NWDA. That aspect of the business, the NWDA side, has blossomed on the work, even though we still have some means to go, and that the workforce development aspect of it is being fleshed out with more partnerships with private sector in relation to training and upskilling Caymanians, as well as an aspect of labor market information, which is something that most people that know me know that I enjoy delving into details and to have decisions made on what the data is showing. So the labor market aspect is the area that has to deliver on the fruits of what we think will be information that will be very important to policy decisions. So if we are able to get from not just what's happening now, but where employers are going with their businesses in sort of 2, 3, 5 year plans, we can then have information that we're able to share based on that to help influence things like course offerings, scholarship priorities, and even starting at a really early age, ingraining in our students areas for which growth markets are in terms of labor. I went to college in Canada after working a couple of years, many moons ago. And one of the things that the technical college I went to did was they didn't actually just report on their outputs, but they reported on their outcomes. So they reported on what their hiring rate were for the graduates.
Right.
So I went to the British Columbia Institute of Technology in Vancouver, Canada, and I checked their site earlier tonight as I was coming on, because it rained in on me that the outcomes are important, right? I think that's what people are looking to see, how well we're spending the government money as to what outcomes we're delivering. And their outcome is that they're still having 90% of their graduates being fully employed. So those are things that will come from labor market information. That output drive as well. For those of you who know the Deputy Premier, Chris Saunders, you know that he is, well, he's an accountant by trade, first of all, right? And is very much driven by data as well. And he can quote stats probably better than anybody else, maybe not quite as much as Dr. Roy Bodden there, but he does walk around with a compendium of statistics in his binder and can rattle off things there. So he is quite keen for us to transition from not just producing outputs in relation to how many things we did and how many people passed through our systems, but how many of those persons have gone on to deliver on their outcome for meaningful employment, challenging employment in areas where that growth and employment exists within the Cayman Islands. So a lot of work cut out there. We also have beefed up our compliance aspect of work. That's the enforcement arm. So they've been doing some great work there as well. And the administration process is where we see the most improvements to come shortly in relation to streamlining the online processes. And we're also looking at this technically it's brilliant, logistically it's challenging, where we know that we have top of the line companies. These are companies that hire Caymanians, they train and develop and progress Caymanians. They comply and exceed all of the legal requirements. And what we really would like to do is design a system that spans across government, that gives them an easier shake. So on their risk profile, they're low risk companies. But we put them through the same application process as everybody else, and the same. So we're looking at tweaking ways that we can recognize that some companies are, leaps and bounds above what the legal requirements are, and therefore should have an easier go at things. So that's called employer accreditation. It's something that we've talked about for several years. There have been a couple of working groups, private sector, public sector partnerships on that. And I'm hoping that we can move ahead with that, because it really does help. Customs and Border Control has a similar approach when it comes to imports, where, and even border security, where intelligence-led, data-driven can help to focus our limited resources at the agencies and the persons that present the most risk to us, and therefore maximize our benefit. Our marching orders from the Deputy Premier this year is to automate as much as possible the rudimentary regular operation for our agencies across the board, freeing up our resources, our limited and valuable human resources, and deal with those areas that require their expertise. So that's our marching orders in terms of sort of priorities for work in general. It's really job placement and making it the job opportunities very visible to Caymanians. So there's some changes coming up in that we'll be able to announce quite shortly.
Okay.
Use of technology that I spoke about before, labor market information, the minimum wage review team is one of the priorities as well. So that working group will be spun up in the coming weeks to look at that and the public consultation, business consultation that goes into minimum wage discussions. I don't think you can get something much more polarizing than minimum wage.
Yes, we'll get into that.
And the work on the jobs portal and making that more efficient and user-friendly, not just for job seekers, but for employers as well. So there's quite a shopping list there. In the meantime, we've also beefed up the training within the work department.
Yes.
So we've hired training managers who are looking at professional development. We also have teams looking at policy and procedures to ensure that folks are getting a consistent result in relation to application of the law, development of formal policies. Those are some of the things that we've had challenges with in the past, and things that we're dedicating resources to. So that was a mouthful.
I know. Well, I'm sure. Well, thank you very much for that insight. And we like to listen to what's happening before we get into our main conversation. And my two astute colleagues have been waiting for this opportunity, and both of them have passions for employment. And I'll let Mr. Mario jump in right here and ask any questions that he may have of the panel. Mario.
Thank you. I was the Senior Assistant Permanent Secretary in 1994, 1997. That's when I first encountered Mr. Howell. I think he was in the Computer Services Department then. And I saw him from then, and I knew he was going to go a high distance, because he always had that great attitude. So I want to thank you again, Mr. Howell. I want to welcome you on the show. And thank you for what you're doing, and wish you all the best in the great work ahead. Now, talking about 1994, 1997, I was in the ministry at that time. The minister was Mr. William McKeever Bush, and Mr. Roy Bodden was, I think, on the backbench then as the supporter of the national team. And we did something called a Manpower Development Advisory Committee, and we developed a Manpower Development Advisory Plan. That plan was developed by the ministry with a lot of stakeholders, and it went to, at that time, Executive Council, which was the forerunner to the cabinet, and it didn't get support because I think a lot of outside interests kind of caused it to die. But in that Manpower Development Advisory Plan, things like what you're talking about, the Labor Management Information System, the LIMS, training and development, scholarships and all that was actually proposed. And also what proposed as well was what eventually went into the Vision 2008, and a revamping of immigration and labor, and making it into an authority where you could actually focus on issues of training and whatnot. So with that, and people like Mr. Gulsaran from the International Labour Organization, which Mr. Roy knows him well, and maybe you also heard of him, Mr. Wesley, they were here, and we were working a lot of stuff over the years, actually for decades now. Well, my question though is, in the year 2022, after so many things have been done, and political promises and campaign discussions and all that, what actually is the vision of the government for human capital development in the country? I mean, is there a vision? I hear a lot of tactical things that you're saying about work, but is there actually a strategic plan or a vision to pull it all together? Because I think, I mean, in my frank view, unless we get to the point of saying, this is our 20-year plan, this is how we're going to get there, this is the resources that we need, the people and the policies, we're going to be talking about this 20 years from now. I mean, I know that's maybe a heavy question, maybe talking about policy, but do you have can you give us anything about what is the actual vision?
It is quite a loaded question, because it does go into politics and policy more so than the technical aspect of what we do. But I can say that one of the things that the Deputy Premier has done is that he's pulled in his colleagues who have that vested interest. So Parliamentary Secretary Ms. Kathy Wilkes, who has sort of a dual role in the Ministry of Education, and has a keen interest on the promotion and advancement of Caymanians, is one of the parliamentary secretaries that is attached to our ministry, and we work closely with. So she's quite keen to look at and drive some of the cross ministry and indeed private sector discussions, because government may well be, and I think, looking at public service, the biggest employer in terms of sheer numbers for one organization. But we have such a diverse economy here, where the majority of Caymanians are actually working with small and medium-sized businesses. In terms of the sheer number of employment opportunities that are there. So our discussions in anything that does affect labor would have to include all of those sectors. So I can say that from a political perspective, all indications are that the government the PAC government is aligned in promoting employment as it cuts across various areas, including labor and immigration, tourism, education. So those are things that are there. It is difficult though, and this is, of anything, be it a IT technical project or a national example. Once you start to involve multiple stakeholders, it becomes a much more challenging thing to even just agree on what winning looks like, much less winning, because folks have different agendas, and they have, for them, success does look different. So again, it goes back to looking at what outcomes are necessary. And for me, the outcomes are an important tool in really measuring how effective we are at utilizing the government's resources versus the people's tax. It's their money, and delivering on what those outputs are and the outcomes are that make a meaningful difference. So we could put on, the best TVET programs. If it doesn't deliver on skilling up or Caymanians for what our employment agencies are looking for, what the businesses are looking for in terms of skill sets, then we may have churned out lots of numbers, but we hadn't made the meaningful impact that we could have if those systems were sort of and programs were tweaked to deliver finished products that were more in line with what the labor market is looking for. So we have been and continue be in this strange dilemma as a country, where we have dramatic overemployment for specialist skills and for volumes of specific resources that exceed what our local population can satisfy. But then we also have marked unemployment in specific areas as well, and none much more visible than what happened when our borders closed, and all of the folks involved in working in the tourism industry, particularly those involved with the cruise tourism industry, found themselves without clients to take them up on their offerings. So it has always been a challenge to attract, to promote, to convince Caymanians to go into those areas where the growth markets are, and to get the skills necessary for that. And it's also been a challenge over the years to convince our Caymanian business owners, and I think if we're frank about it, unless you have a LCCL, your business is owned at least 60% by a Caymanian. So work has to balance the interests of a Caymanian business owner who wants to grow and promote their business, with the Caymanian business owner hiring Caymanians and giving them an opportunity for advancement in their country. Another aspect of that is really the bit that the small business development agency is doing in relation to inspiring and supporting and driving Caymanians to explore the entrepreneurial spirit, and instead of going into the labor market as workers, going in as business owners, so that they're going through proper business planning, business case development, and those sorts of things. So really long-winded answer to say, yes, I know that the government is indeed interested in a joined-up approach. I just know from my experience that is much more easier said than done. It becomes more of a philosophical discussion more than a practical one, especially when we talk about what success looks like.
Okay, thank you for being so straight. Mario, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just want to say about what you said. What you said is 100% correct, Mr. Howell. It does take a lot of effort, but once you have a champion or champions who are actually driving it, and you have a project plan, and you have an objective, and you keep on having that sort of very, dogmatic approach, just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, we'll get it. That's how we got things like pensions and other things. Just keep pushing and pushing. So
Absolutely.
I wish you all the best. The other question I have is in regard. You mentioned the employer accreditation system,
Mhm.
which is like something that rewards employers for doing good things, and such. So you're saying that may be kind of dusted off and reviewed in the near future.
That is something that is very attractive to our minister, and it is something that we've seen the added benefit of sort of using the risk approach, even our border control aspects, where we're able to um, create efficiencies and effectiveness in the same brushstroke, where we're able to process um, bits a whole lot quicker for the low risk individuals and dedicate the limited resources to those persons who present and those agencies that present the highest risk. Now that relies on a wealth of information, analytics, as well as training and development of key resources to recognize that. But yeah, it is definitely the way to go. I mean, if we look at things like persons who deliver services to the government, may that be someone in the video production area. So almost everything now. Ralph can share with you that
Yes.
the business is rapidly changing from a print and produce to a online, and
Online.
online
Yes. Hmm.
has different connotations for different age groups. And if you want to get through to the younger and even the older folks as well,
Yes.
you have to involve digital and video content, the length of which would be driven by the demographics. But those are scarce resources, and we don't have them all within the government. So what the GIS and internal comms have done is they've vetted individual companies and gone through the protocols of what it is. So we have a list of individuals who are sort of approved to produce government branded content that we can then use quite rapidly to push out our messages. The same is going to be through for even the way that we do the labor market stuff. Just to get the job opportunities in front of individuals, we have to be very creative in how we do that.
Yes.
The days of folks, and I hate to say this because Ralph has his printed newspaper, but the days of folks picking up a daily newspaper
Yes.
along with their patty and Pepsi and sitting down and going through that, cover to cover, is long gone in relation to daily. Folks are doing that on a couple of days a week now. But there's some individuals that they don't get any news media from traditional printed.
Yeah.
And they don't even listen to regular news programs. They're getting snippets on TikTok, Instagram, and if you're a little bit older in demographic, Facebook and other places. So we really needed to have to retool and get into those areas. So it does complicate the way that we reach our target demographics. And by that, I mean job seekers, persons looking for onward promotion, but also for the employers, and to be able to signal to those who are doing the right things that, yeah, we like what you're doing. Your Caymanian to non-Caymanian ratio is leading in your category of work, and the number of scholarships that you've produced and the interns that you've gone through is making a significant difference. We can see that those are folks that should have less of an issue when they come looking for services, because they've demonstrated that they're doing the right thing. I mean, I will venture to add that when I finished sixth form in 1987, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, so I started work with the government. And after 2 years, I went off on what was a government scholarship. before I finished sixth form, I did unpaid internship with the government, which helped to develop some skills of working with persons. It was in a customer service area, so I developed some customer service skills that still serve me to this day, even in the role that I'm in. But I say all that to say that, when we invest in our Caymanians from an early age all the way through, helping them to rise to their potential, then their prospects are quite much more attainable. The deputy governor who was on the panel earlier had a similar rise up through. So he started that immigration at a really young age, and his professional and education development has been, through government scholarships and work and opportunities that were presented there as well. So those are some of the things that we really need to be able to do that on scale.
Okay. Well, let me jump. Okay. Yeah. But let me jump in here. I know that Roy has a lot of those same concerns that you have. So we'll get him to come in here with a few questions, and I'm sure that you'll probably have some of those similar responses that you were going to have. Mr. Budden, thanks for waiting. You're on stage now.
I have listened and I follow the changes that are being made. But one of my concerns is that we still lack sound scientific base for our development in terms of manpower and labor, because we have never, to my knowledge, had a proper manpower needs assessment conducted. And so in the absence of that, I ask, how can we be precise? How do we know, for example, what areas we need more people in? How do we balance that training of Caymanians in those areas as against importing? And one of the criticisms I have with the system is I'm a purist, and I believe that there should be a strict separation between labor and manpower and immigration. I think labor is labor, and that should have nothing to do with people who want to come into the jurisdiction as citizens or permanent residents. And I would love to see we get to that level of sophistication. But being a former Minister of Labor myself, I am well aware of some of the challenges, and I took cognizance when work came in and it was developed and hyped up. I thought that would have been more effective than it really has been. I noticed now that there is a new added element I was reading a couple of days ago, which is being trotted out to further improve the system. I think that if you walk the streets as I do, there's a general disappointment in Caymanians in terms of the opportunities that they get in the employment world inside of Cayman. There are a number of complaints which I think we need to look about addressing, and the basis of which is, as I have said, is that we can't be effective unless we know where the needs are, where the gaps are. And we can only do that by having a proper manpower needs assessment survey, something that is going to tell us how many mechanics we are going to need in the next 10 years, how many engineers, how many school teachers, and all this kind of things. So I have listened and I'm following keenly what is being said and being done. But to me, I still remain convinced that it is going to be as effective as it should be, because it lacks, to my mind, the basics. I'm a harsh critic, and for that I have no apologies, but that's the way I see it.
No, absolutely, and to some respects I agree with you, but in some respects, the world is changing, and Cayman is no different. We're connected. So my tenure with the government is July this year. I'll be going on 35 years.
Wow.
Our average turnover now for an employee is 2 years. So if it took us a year to plan to see what we're going to look like, the labor market would have shifted just from the sheer light-footedness of persons when it comes to how long they want to stay in a particular industry, in a particular job. So the benefits of doing an expensive undertaking that takes months, if not year plus to do, is that if the market is going to shift dramatically in that period of time, then how valuable is that to it? I mean, we are at moving at light pace in relation to that. Our largest department growth at this point is actually Travel Cayman. And if someone told me 18 months ago we would needed 110, 120 persons to manage our borders in relation to vaccine certificates and other things like that, I'd say, no man, you're joking. But here we are, having to spin up a government department in the space of 16, 18 months. There's some score. No, don't get me that the data isn't important. There's some core skills that are there that are necessary and that we know. So you don't have to be a genius to know that the legal fraternity would require a whole cadre of support mechanisms. So if you don't want to be a lawyer, there's a whole rung of bits there. You would know as a fact, without doing any data, that if you are in data analytics, if you are in technology, broadcast technology like we're doing now, that's an area where we see growth going on. But teachers, doctors, those are bits there. So I hear and I agree that we need that data. I just would be careful about anything that takes too long to produce, because things are changing quite dramatically. But we also need to start at a very young age with our students to ingrain in them that some of these professions are admirable professions, even if they're not dress-up professions. And I'm talking about now teaching, nursing, other support mechanisms within the medical, doctors, those things where, the average person coming out wanting to work within a bank, for example. Now, how many of us actually visit a bank on a regular basis anymore? All of our stuff is done online. We pay by debit card, and COVID has helped that to progress that at tremendous rate as well. So absolutely agree that we need data, just to be cautioned by the fact that the global growth and the global change in technology does drive what the labor market looks like, and Cayman is no different. There's room for break and fix mechanics, but as we know now, the cars are coming much more technologically advanced. So the first thing that the guys do when I bring my car in for servicing is they hook the laptop up to it so they can start to figure out what's going on with it. Doesn't mean that the guys that work on the pistons and the valves and all that don't need that particular training, but our training now needs to be on technology as well, in mechanics. Yeah. So that's an aspect that I think, there's good bit for data, but we are an economy that's driven by the private sector. Some of that can be influenced by government policy, but the private sector is the largest body of volume in terms of employment. So in addition to figuring out what's going on now, I think we need to tap into what they see their businesses morphing into in 3-5 years. I doubt anybody would give you a 10-year view on what businesses look like now, because that would really be looking at a crystal ball.
Mr. Roy, do you have a follow-up?
But could I just say, though, that we must not lose hope. We must not abandon visioning and long-term planning simply because it's difficult. Because, yes, it's all forecasting. Forecasting exists in all spheres of life, and markets, and everything that we do is estimating, forecasting scenarios and whatnot, right? So again, I would like to, while I give Mr. Bawden a chance to get back in, is go back to the question I asked at the beginning, Mr. Howell. What is the vision? What is the plan? If we have a vision, then we can work towards something. And I'm concerned that Cayman as a world-class service economy, I mean, our exports are service, right? We export services, not products. But what are we doing enough to develop the critical human capital that's required to support that service economy? And that's what I call about the vision.
Mr. Bawden?
And I would say, I mean, we have probably one of the more generous scholarship programs of any country in relation to the folks that the government sponsors to go off for further education, either at our local institutions or internationally. But again, I keep going back to, so if you are inclined to work with your hands outside, with tools or maybe with technology, me trying to convince you to come in to do development on a paralegal job, which is well paying, people making great livings off that with great career advancement options. It's going to be a very difficult conversation to have to convince somebody that they want to do that, right? And I think that's something that we really need to do it. And I think that's a combination of government policy, government promotion, employers, parents, teachers, career counselors, talking about what the options are there. If we go back to, lots of young men and young women have an interest in aircraft industry, right? So they want to be pilots, they want to be airplane mechanics. There's a finite market for that in Cayman, and it would become a requirement for them to look at other opportunities within the airline industry or go offshore to explore their careers. They might be flying for some of the bigger countries. So where the US is now facing a pilot shortage, we have a number of Caymanian who have been trained and gotten their commercial pilot's license, but the market for those services here isn't there. So I totally agree with you that the market does understanding the market really does help to shape this. And again, that's where I'm quite proud that we're building out that labor market information aspect of work. So those persons, their responsibility is to not just look at what's happening now, because we can tell how many waiters, bartenders are being hired, carpenters, masons, but to then take that information to help then drive and shape policy informed with data. So I get you. Just caution to think that just like you going into the bank to get a loan, they'll give you a fixed loan up 3 to 5 years. If you're going beyond that, then the element of risk comes in, and the margins then would be priced based on risk. Mr. Ralph is a financial background expert, so no different. The labor market is no different from the financial market in that regard.
Mr. Roy, sorry.
Yeah.
So I want to concur that much is being done in terms of scholarships and stuff. I agree with that, but I still go back to my point that it is more on an ad hoc basis than it is on any strict scientific background or foundation.
Exactly.
And what I see as a really effective policy or position is that when we know the areas of need that we have, we are in a better position to award scholarships to get people trained to fill those areas of need. We are in that should inform us also on the kind of immigrants that we should take in. Let me give you an example. When I immigrated to Canada in the 1980s, right, there was a need for tool and die makers. So that means that anyone coming into Canada with those skills had priorities over ordinary people, over school teachers, over bankers, that sort of thing. That is how societies and nations build. That's how they come up with an immigration policies and labor policies. So if we don't have a system where we are going to project where the needs are going to be, bearing in mind, I take your point, it is difficult to make accurate predictions, but it's not rocket science. We don't have to be precise. We just have to have a general idea. How do we know? For example, you take the case of attorneys. We have Caymanian attorneys who can't get jobs where they would like to get them because while they're trained, we're still taking in people from the outside.
Mhm.
And these are the kinds of things that we have to deal with. These are the kinds of things that have never been quite effectively addressed. So I'm saying that that is what I want to see and hear. How are we going to take steps to address these kind of things to ensure that our people are going to be given consideration? I'm not saying that you have to get the job because you're Caymanian, but I want to be able to say that they have been considered as competitive. See, otherwise, the system, as I see it, does not serve as efficiently as it could serve, and that's my point.
No, agreed. And I mean, as a former president of UCCI, you would have run headfirst into this with your course offerings. How do you decide on what courses you're offering? You may well know from your own research and data where growth markets are going to be. Convincing the students to enroll in those programs is another thing. Seeing them through the graduation is another thing, and having them go out and actively seek work is yet another. So I agree. We have, and these are what I call, wicked problems in which it's not a single solution and it's multifaceted. So it's not just having information; it's being able to use that information in such a way that we have created meaningful change in the very way that our people think about work and how they go out to seek work and how they seek to develop themselves.
So I have a question, Mr. Howell.
Yes, sir.
So does work, any aspect of work, offer counseling, professional counseling, in terms of what is available, what is similar? So you might want to do this, but right now the market for that is saturated. But what about this? This is closely associated. This is closely affiliated to that. And you made an allusion some time ago. You were talking about the medical field, for example. We started at UCCI a nursing program, but not everybody would be qualified to be a nurse. But there are other things they could be that we could root them in if they have an interest in working in the medical field, phlebotomy, pharmacy, all those kind of things. So is work set up with any arm that offers counseling to someone who comes in and say, well, I would like to be this? Well, I'm sorry, the statistics say that this field right now is saturated, but here's an allied field that we would recommend that you could take on. Is that kind of counseling available?
Absolutely, and it's in varying levels of support, and this is something that came over from NWDA that's blossoming under the additional hiring that's been happening in that area, and none not so more visible than what happened when we had many of our Caymanians displaced from the tourism industry. So we had individuals who were boat captains, boat engineers, looking for a means to support their family without any handouts from the government. So individuals who were working on the boats that plied the North Sound to Stingray City and all that, full of tourists, came back and we were able to work with them and retool them into engineers that work within the hotels, maintaining their electrical systems, plumbing and those things. But like you said, that's not for everybody. But when it works, it really does work. But again, I we have a program, Passport to Success, which we do with the youngsters, and we go through a recruitment process with them. And I remember going to one of the graduation ceremonies, and there's a 16-year-old young man, brilliant. He's going to go places, and he was reflecting on his time. And there are a number of companies that have supported Passport to Success with internships. This young man did a internship with a fast food company, and he was working in the back. And he related that his friends who were not working at the time, I might venture to add, came in as customers of that establishment, and he ran in the freezer and hid from them because he was ashamed that he was working in a fast food company, although he was not employed otherwise. He went on to intern at some of the stores on the waterfront. He interned at the hotel and fell in love with the hotel, and they fell in love with him. So he's now working in that industry. But it always dawned on me as like, why was that young man so embarrassed to be seen working in the fast food? What have we done as a society that our folks think it's better to not be employed than to be employed in a fast food industry? And that is beyond just what one agency can do. That's across the board. No, I'm not saying that we can't expand past fast food, but some of us need to start there. I started in the mailroom sorting mail and sending telexes, something technology that I don't think exists anymore. But that was the work that was available at the time. As a teenager, I worked with my dad in his shoe store. I mean, that was working with your hands on very dirty instruments, but it was work, and we all start someplace. But that to me is a wider conversation that I really think gentlemen of your caliber need to push that agenda, because it goes just beyond government. I think there is a role for government and the elected government to help drive what the next version of Cayman looks like, and what the next rung of our economy looks like. Just like we went targeted at the financial services industry and grew that, be that call centers, be that whatever aspect is the next vision, then I think their policies in relation to concessions and other things can be driven by that to help create where we're going, rather than tag along for the ride on the initiatives that are naturally coming through. But again, I am not a politician. I'm a technical deliverer of policy. I leave that for them. But I really do see that that's the way, sort of,
Mr. Howell, can I just say though, again, I want to take us back to the issue of the vision and the strategy, because I'm a human resources consultant. I've been in the private sector, been in the public sector. I've been crying in the wilderness for the last 30 years about the same subject. I tried to do something about it by running in the election last April.
Mm-hmm.
But unless the government sets up a vision for where we want to be and a strategy, the private sector is not going to go and do it on their own without some direction. And that's where I think, and I'm not criticizing you or your minister or any minister or government. I'm saying that nationally we need to have a policy. And if we don't have that, we're going to be spinning top in mud, as they say, and spinning wheels, like Don Quixote, chasing the windmills. If we don't do this, because what we're talking about tonight are some serious policy issues. Now, there was an article in one of Mr. Ralph's competitor newspaper recently that said COVID's remote work explosion could see Cayman jobs go overseas. Now, that's something that is going to be a matter that needs to be looked at as well. How do we deal with that? So all I'm saying is that government needs to set the tone, the vision, the strategy, and then we follow it. It doesn't mean that Mr. Les Howell has to do everything, but we got to have a coordinating of all this. Otherwise, we're going to get people frustrated. And as Dr. Roy mentioned, we have a scholarship secretariat that's disconnected from work. People go off on expensive scholarships and they come back and they can't get a job because there's no planning for them. So we have failed. And I think we can do better.
Well, gentlemen, we're coming close to when let's wrap up. But a couple of things came out here, which I'm sure we will have to have a part 2 to this conversation. Yeah. Definitely, if Mr. Howell is willing. But the government has...
It may well be that you need to invite the politicians on.
Okay.
Because some of these aspects are very much in that arena, right?
All right. Well, the government has just recently appointed a head of strategy. And it is my intention to invite Pilar, once she's settled in, to come on board and sort of talk to us about strategy. And like you said, you execute the decisions. And of course, you have your input. But yes, as we have noted, there's some strategy. And like you said, it's not for the government alone to do. And the community has a part to play, not only the employers, but also the culture, how we look at employees and the types of jobs that they do. And how do we encourage people to take different types of work? So we see there's some challenges. And this issue, like my colleague said, are not going to go away overnight. It's a mindset, it's some planning. And we want to be on board and want to be, your partners in how this thing happened. I would love to talk about the newspaper advertising, but, I don't have that much time. But just to mention to you that when I started out in 2013, my goal was to have electronic job advertising. And I was told at that point, well, the law said you had to have a newspaper. I ended up with a newspaper. And what I've learned is that there has to be a combination between newspaper and online access. Yes, the kids don't like the newspaper anymore, but there are many people who still live around who love the newspapers, and I would say that 50% of the community still like the newspapers. And the thing is, when you're looking at jobs, it's not just the job seekers, but their family, their friends, and other people looking at
Absolutely.
jobs as well. So I think there has to be a balance in how you move forward with promoting where the jobs are, and that is by utilizing technology as well as the traditional way, which is the newspapers. And like I said, I created an online job site, but I've learned by being in media that it has to be a balance with everything else. But I'll be happy to hear about your plans in the future next time we come around. But I'll just give my colleagues 2 minutes each to ask and make any final comments, and then we have you wrap up, Mr. Paul.
I just have to ask Mr. Howell one last question. Then the jobs portal, and I think Ralph is correct. I mean, it seems to me that the jobs jobs portal, as you admitted earlier, it's having some issues, and I think you say you plan to do some work to make it more user friendly, more effective. But I think job seekers are having a difficult time getting in there to see what jobs are available because they have to register to get on, and then some employers are also finding it very cumbersome. So give us just a 30-second overview of what you plan to do about Jobs Cayman, Jobs Portal.
So the immediate change will be because there's another change in policy. So the reason for the registration prior to seeing the jobs were that there was a policy decision around making sure that Caymanians were the only ones that were able to see these jobs that were being advertised for Caymanians to apply to. And the only way we could do that in a technology base is to have them register so we can pre-vet them. That has presented its own issues and has actually worked to restrict the number of persons viewing the jobs. So a policy change has been made, and the technical bits is now catching up with that, where the first change you'll see coming up quite shortly here is that the available jobs will be quite searchable without registering for them. If you want to then register and apply for those jobs, then that's done. The registration is the key point, though, because what it does do is present to the decision makers which Caymanians out there are interested in these jobs, so that if there's a work permit being requested and they're qualified and equipped Caymanians applying for it, then the decision makers have the ability then to reject that application and encourage the employer to go out and hire the Caymanians and develop the talent that's there. I think that the jobs pool really needs to get to the point that employers are looking first at Caymanians before they select a non-Caymanian. So there's some policy decisions around that will also come out in the technology, but work is being done to tweak that aspect of making the jobs more visible. We'll also be reintroducing some of the jobs on paper bits as well, but I won't steal the thunder of the politicians on that, other than to say that some changes are coming that will help to expand the visibility of jobs. Yeah.
Mr. Roy?
Yeah, I want to commend Mr. Howell on the job that he's doing. I know that the circumstances are not ideal, but I'm convinced that he's trying. And I want to encourage him because he knows it. I want to bring back to this point. He made this point that he is just a technical advisor. That's right. As a chief officer, you're the minister's chief technical advisor. And I know you, I'm acquainted with you, and I'm acquainted with your minister. And I think that both of you have abilities. And I want you to remember that you are the chief technical advisor. So you come up with these ideas and you convince the minister that implementing these ideas you have, turning those into policy, will yield optimum results. That is your job. Sometimes it's going to get swatted down, but I don't want you to be reticent in coming up with those suggestions, because I see that there are improvements. What I'm taking contention with is that the improvements can be more effective and they can be more forthcoming, because there's an old saying that says, meanwhile the grass is growing, a horse is starving.
Absolutely.
And the final thing I want to say is, don't be afraid to make mistakes. because none of us are perfect, and that's making mistakes is a part of the learning process. But we have everything to gain and not much to lose if we come up with these improvements that are going to make the practice more effective and encourage Caymanians to come into the workforce. When you come back on next time, I'm going to tell you how to deal with that business of hiding, because it seems one of the problems with us Caymanians is that we have not been able to distinguish service from servility. And so we believe that certain types of jobs are more important than others. Because while I was at the university college, when I asked my students what they wanted to be, they tell me all kinds of grandiose things like lawyer, pilot. And I know that they didn't have those kinds of aptitudes, but I didn't want to discourage them. And I would ask them why. They would tell me, well, that's where the prestige is. That's where the big bucks are. So I used to ask them, so if everybody wanted to be a lawyer or a pilot, tell me who would be a teacher and where would you be?
Yeah.
So there is no job more important than the other. And but that has to begin, as you said, as you alluded to, in the primary schools. We have to tell them, because everybody can't be a chief officer. You know, the civil service would be top heavy.
Absolutely.
What would be done? So that's, yeah. So
Thank you, Mr. Roy.
I congratulate you and I wish you well.
Thank you, sir.
Mario, you have anything else before we get?
No, just to say thanks, Mr. Howell, and thanks to the viewers. And I didn't say at the beginning, Happy New Year. It's already February. Yes. Happy New Year to all of our viewers. Yes. It's our first show for this year, but we're back on the road again. So, yes. So Howell, I hope we gave you enough time and we didn't hit you too hard, but we want you to come back and talk to us. And as Mr. Ralph mentioned, maybe other, politicians or the chief strategy officer or whatever. But this is a serious issue, and we wish you the best. We commend you, as Dr. Roy mentioned, and don't give up.
Another question I have to ask you: is this easier than supervising elections?
No. Other than dealing with very competitive politicians, this job is much more challenging because the stakeholders are much more diverse, and winning to them looks very different. So my job of mediating all of the competing resources and needs to deliver on what is an agreed output is sometimes a job in and of itself. But I really enjoy what I do. I work every day to help to give people the opportunity that I had as a young Caymanian civil servant coming up, and one that takes pride in working in the service. So no, this is much more difficult, but I do enjoy it. And to see results in it, I had a hand in forming the Coast Guard, and literally I had goosebumps when I did my first tour there, because what were figures on a spreadsheet that I was selling to the cabinet at the time in relation to staffing. I see very proud, trained, professional Caymanians now delivering on the Coast Guard, and that literally gave me goosebumps on my sleeve to know that I had a hand in sort of progressing that whole thing. And the same for all of our programs. That's where I get the joy of, if I go to a restaurant and someone that's serving me went through one of our Passport to Success programs, and this is their way to get into the hospitality industry. I'm overjoyed. That place is going to see a lot of me, because I like seeing my own people there. So happy to do what I'm doing, but it is quite challenging.
Well, I want to say thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. I can hear the passion in your voice, and I think that there are many Caymanians like you who really want the best for the Cayman Islands. And I'm sure we'll see you again back here. To our to viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us for another panel. We're back here again next week, Thursday at 8 o'clock for another super show. We'll be updating you on that very soon, who we're talking to. Probably someone from the private sector, because we know the balance that has to be done in government with helping to choose the right people for work, and it may be Caymanians versus expats, and we have to make the right decisions, and the economy has to move forward. On behalf of my co-host, Mr. Howell, thank you for coming again, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks
Good night.
very much.
Have a wonderful
Good night.
day.
Thank you.